Hi, I'm Glenn Rogers, and this is Biblical Insights. Our video today is about whether or not God exists. The title is simply, Does God Exist? The short answer is yes, but the question is always asked, well, how do you know? Can you prove the existence of God? And some people say, no, you can't. But I think you can, and we're going to demonstrate how we can do that today. But first, there are several things that I need to mention so that you understand where we're going. Even though this program is called Biblical Insights, we're not going to be referencing the Bible today. You can't use the Bible to prove the existence of God. If you open the book at the very beginning, Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Someone can then read that and then close it and say, see, God exists. The Bible says God exists. Well, yeah, but that's not a valid argument. If someone says, well, sure it is, because the Bible is inspired. God inspired the Bible, so it's true. Well, but you see, then you're using God to prove God. You're assuming the existence of God and then using that to prove the existence of God. Well, you can't do that. Okay, that's circular reasoning, and people who study arguments and argumentation and logic and rationality and that sort of thing, in other words, philosophers, know that that's not a good argument. It's called a fallacious argument. So when you're trying to discuss the existence of God, you don't refer to the Bible. You have to use rationality. You have to develop arguments that you can think about that have nothing to do with what the Bible has to say. You don't get to the Bible until you're way, way, way down the road and you've already demonstrated the existence of God. And then ask the question, now, then is it reasonable, since God exists and created the universe, that he would communicate with human beings? The answer is, yeah, that's reasonable. Well, now you get to the Bible. But see, that's way, way, way down the road. So you can't start with the Bible. You have to start someplace else. And the place we're going to begin is with a very simple question that was asked by the philosopher Leibniz, who lived and worked in the late 1600s, early 1700s, a brilliant German philosopher. And he asked the question, why is there something rather than nothing? And that's a good question, because it's theoretically possible that nothing could exist. But maybe there's just nothing. Well, the problem with that, it's not a problem, but the way to answer that is, of course, we don't have a state of nothingness. We have a state of somethingness. Things exist. Something exists. Now, we know that if something exists now, that means that something has always existed. Well, how do you know that? Because another philosopher that lived a long time before Leibniz, by the name of Parmenides, who lived 2,600 years ago, articulated the idea that from nothing comes nothing. All right, what that means is if you ever have a state of absolute nothingness, where no thing of any kind exists, then all you would ever have is nothingness. Because if you have a condition where there is absolutely nothing, then nothing is going to come from that. Things don't just pop into existence out of nothing. See, that doesn't work. It doesn't make any sense. So if there was ever a state of nothingness, that's what we'd have now, is a state of nothingness. But we don't have that, do we? We have a state of somethingness. Things exist. Therefore, something has always existed. That's just the simple reality of it. Something has always existed. Now, the question is, well, what is it that has always existed? And there are two basic possibilities. And we know this because we can observe it in the existence that we have today in reality. Now, this is going to become a very important point, so pay attention to this. Science tells us that the way to understand the world is through observation. You don't just make things up. You don't just pull stuff out of your hat and go, well, here's the explanation of that, and you just pull it out of your hat. That doesn't work. And I agree. Okay, you have to observe the world and observe how it works. You have to see what there is to see, and then you draw conclusions based on observation. Okay, now if we observe, if we look closely and carefully at what there is, we see that there are two fundamental sorts of things that exist: physical or material things, atoms, molecules, subatomic particles, dirt, rocks, that sort of thing, physical stuff. So let's refer to it as matter, physical matter, okay, or just matter. That's one sort of thing that exists. Now, matter is not living, it's not conscious, and it's not rational. Matter is just stuff, okay, and it's all around us. The water, air, dirt, rocks, the planets. Okay, there are things that are not alive, and that's made up of physical matter. And the other form of substance that exists, and I'm using the word for the philosophers out there who might hear this, I'm using the word substance differently than Aristotle did. I realize that. You can read about that in my book, Important Stuff Aristotle Thought, where I talk about substance as Aristotle understood it and described it. I'm using the word differently here, and that's perfectly okay for me to do that. All right, another fundamental substance that exists is what we might call mental stuff or mind. Okay, the brain is a physical organ. It is not the mind, it is the brain. The mind is that immaterial stuff that exists, that thinks, that plans, that has purpose, that has intention, that is conscious, that is rational. A mind wills and decides and weighs alternatives and chooses, okay? And we know that this sort of stuff exists and that it thinks about concepts and ideas and principles and all of that. See, the brain is just a physical object. The brain is just matter, okay? And it is not the same thing as the mind. Now, the two things then that exist that are candidates for that which has always existed are either matter or mind. Those are the only two. And I've asked hundreds of people in my classes, and I've read dozens and dozens and dozens of books on the subject, looking for someone to come up with a third alternative or a fourth or fifth alternative, whatever, however many they can come up with, and nobody does. Okay, nobody's ever come up with a third one, even, not let alone a fourth or a fifth. All right, so there are two candidates for that which has always existed, and one is physical matter, and the other is mind, mental stuff, the thinking stuff. Okay, now, if you say that which always existed is matter, physical matter, then you have a couple of problems. Okay, first, we know that the universe has not always existed. Okay, ancient people thought, they just assumed that the universe, the cosmos, the Greeks called it, just always existed. It's just always been here. But we know now that it hasn't. Scientists pretty much universally agree that the universe came into existence 14 to 15 billion years ago in what we call the Big Bang, a gigantic explosion that, started in this infinitesimally, I just lost how to say that word, very, very small piece of energy, of matter that exploded and threw everything outward. And Hubble was able to record back in the late 1920s that the universe is still expanding outward from the force of that explosion. Things are still expanding outward. Okay, and so scientists know that the universe hasn't always existed. It came into existence. Okay, so you can't say the universe has always existed. It's just not there. No reason for that to be an idea that people accept. But you can get back beyond that to this tiny little piece of matter. We don't know how tiny it was, but people assume it was very, very tightly compacted. This energy, matter, non-living, non-conscious, non-rational matter that exploded and brought the universe into being. Okay, that always existed. Okay, well, the problem with that is that if we observe how the universe works, and that's what scientists insist that we do, that we use observation and then use what we observe to formulate hypotheses and theories and that sort of thing. And I think that's a good method to use. If we do that, then we run into a serious problem with the idea that matter is that which always existed. Because if you choose that, what you have then is you have something that is not living generating something that is alive. You have something that is not conscious generating something that is conscious. And you have something that is not rational generating that which is rational. Now, materialists, that is, people who embrace the idea that only physical things exist, okay, and they would just laugh at what I said about minds and the existence of mental stuff. They would just laugh at that and go, there's no. They believe that only physical things exist, and therefore matter has always existed, and that's what generated everything else. And when I say, yeah, but then how do you account for matter, which is not living, not conscious, not rational, generating things that are living, conscious, and rational? They say, well, it just happened in tiny, tiny, tiny little increments over a long period of time. Well, that's what they say, and this was, rooted in Darwin's natural selection, which, by the way, even Darwin knew wasn't a theory that would hold up under very close scrutiny. If you could discover anything that couldn't have developed that way, then he said in his book, Origins, he said, then the whole theory falls apart. Well, it has. It's fallen apart because we found all sorts of things that could not have developed that way. But that's a different issue. Okay, if we get back to the idea of matter generating life, consciousness, and rationality, at some point, no matter how slowly in small increments over how much time, at some point, there had to have been something that was not living that generated something that was, or something that was not living that began to live. Okay, those are the only two options. You had to have something that was not conscious that generated something that was conscious, or something that was not conscious that suddenly became conscious. And you had to have something that was not rational that generated something that was rational, or something that was not rational that suddenly became rational. See, those are the only alternatives. At some point, if you say just all at once or very slow increments over a long period of time, still you are left with, and there is no other alternative, you are left with the idea that at some point, that which was not living either generated something that was living or became something that was living. Something that was not conscious generated something that was conscious, or suddenly just became conscious. And something that was not... I'm sorry, we had a little malfunction there. Let me get back to what I was saying. That something that was not rational either it generated something that was rational, or it suddenly became rational. Okay, there's no way around that. That's what the theory of materialism requires. That ultimately that which is not living, not conscious, not rational, generated those things that are living, conscious, and rational. And to simply say, well, it happened very, very slowly over a long period of time in tiny little increments, and well, that doesn't get it. That is not an acceptable answer. It doesn't work, because at some point, something that wasn't alive, generated something that was, or something that wasn't alive became. You see the problem. It just doesn't work. Okay, so what's the other alternative? Well, the other alternative is that which always existed was mind. It was mental stuff. And that is living, conscious, and rational. And so you have that which is living, generating that which is living, that which is conscious, generating that which is conscious, and that which is rational, generating that which is rational. Now, that makes perfectly good sense, because when we observe, when we engage in the scientific principle of observation and drawing conclusions based upon our observations, we see that in the world, things that are living are produced by things that are living. Things that are conscious are produced by things that are conscious, and things that are rational are produced by things that are rational. And so what this tells us is that a very good answer for the question, what is it that has always existed, is mind. Okay? Now, materialists will then turn the question around and say, well, okay, but how did that mind create that which is physical matter? Well, the obvious answer is that the mind created it. Now, minds can be very powerful. We're not very powerful minds because we're just baby minds. Human beings are fairly new on the scene, and each of us, as we come into existence, when we're conceived, and then continue to exist in physical form for a few years as children, we grow and we mature, and our brains begin to work and in conjunction with the mind, and we begin to think about things. Even children, young minds, baby minds, create thoughts. We create thoughts all the time. Thoughts are created out of nothing. We just think them, and we're able to do that. What I suggest is that which always existed is mind, so I refer to it as the eternally existing rational mind. Okay, that mind is not a baby mind that's just learning and developing and growing and just learning the basics like we are here in our physical context. Even those of us who've been around many years and have read a lot of books and are considered highly educated, we're still just baby minds. We still don't understand very much of what the totality there is to understand. We don't understand very much of that. So we're all baby minds, whether we're physical babies or whether we're grown up old people. We're still just baby minds. We haven't been around all that long in comparison to the eternally existing mind. That eternally existing mind has the power not only to create thoughts, but to create physical matter. Okay, that's how you would account for it, and I don't think that's much of a stretch. Scientists who study the paranormal discovered people who have telekinetic powers. They can move objects with their minds. Now, some people poo-poo this idea and go, nah, there's no such thing. There's no evidence for that. And yet, there are things that simply cannot be explained, where people can do excuse me, amazing things with their minds. And so I think it makes much more sense and is much more scientific, because it's rooted in observation, to say that that which has always existed is an eternally existing mind. Now, some people would then want to jump to the conclusion then and say, well, then that's God. Well, okay, technically, I guess you could say that. You can call it God if you want. I don't think, from a philosophical point of view, I don't think we're quite ready yet just to start talking about the God of the Bible, because that's what people, want to do. I think we have to continue on down the road rationally with rational arguments that can be analyzed and that make sense without referring to the God of the Bible yet. That's going to come later, way down the road. But for now, for the beginning, we need to be able to say that the reason things exist now, and clearly they do, is because something has always existed, and that which always existed was mind. It was an eternally existing rational mind. If you want to call that God, go ahead. That's a good idea. Just don't try to jump into the Bible yet, because we're not there. And maybe in future videos we'll take some of those additional steps. But eventually you do get there. Okay, I can assure you of that. Eventually you do get there to where you could read Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And you can show, again, based on observation and what we know scientifically, not what we think, but what we know scientifically, that the way the Bible describes the creation of the universe is perfectly reasonable and rational. You just have to be careful not to be too literal with what you read in Genesis 1 and 2. But the general idea there's everything that exists can be traced back to God, which I would describe as that eternally existing mind. Well, that's about as far as we can go today in this one video. I hope you have found this helpful. I think what you need to do is maybe watch this 2 or 3 times, listen very, very closely, take some notes, write some things down, and go over this in your own mind so that you're clear on what the argument is. This argument was, I first made, it's called a cosmological argument. It's of my own design. I made it first and put it out there in my book, Proof of God. This was a textbook that I wrote when I was teaching philosophy, and specifically teaching a course in the philosophy of religion. And there are many different cosmological arguments. This one happens to be mine. If you want to study it in more detail, as well as study some of the other arguments for the existence of God, you can find them in that book that I wrote called Proof of God. You can find it online and whatever if you're interested in that. So I hope you found this helpful, and as always, I would leave you with these thoughts. Read your Bible, pray, go to church, and may God bless.